Emily Carter had not always been made of iron. There was a time distant now, softened by years of deliberate forgetting when she had been a girl who left her bedroom light on because the dark felt too big, too quiet, too full of the absence of people who were supposed to stay. But that girl had been buried somewhere beneath a decade of board meetings and quarterly earnings calls, and the particular silence of a penthouse apartment at 2 in the morning, and Emily had learned not to go looking for her. She was 35 years old, the chief executive officer of Nexara Technologies, a firm valued at $4.7 billion, and climbing, headquartered in a glass tower in Midtown Manhattan that reflected the sky so perfectly that on clear mornings it seemed to disappear into it entirely. The press had given her many names, the most enduring one, appearing in headlines from San Francisco to Singapore, was the Iron Woman of Silicon Valley, a title she had neither sought nor rejected, because to reject it would have required caring, and caring was a luxury she had quietly stopped, affording herself somewhere around the time her marriage ended, and she realized that she had not cried at the signing of the divorce papers. She had stood in the attorney's office on a gray February afternoon with her signature still drying on the page and thought, "When did I become someone who cannot feel this?" The answer, she suspected, was gradually, and then all at once. The way most important things happen. Her days began at 5 in the morning. Not because she was an early riser by nature, but because 5 o'clock was when the silence of the city was still thick enough to work inside without interruption. By 6, she had reviewed overnight reports from 3 time zones. By 7, she was in the car, her laptop open across her knees. She ate breakfast at her desk when she remembered to eat at all. She took meetings back to back with the efficiency of someone who has learned that the space between meetings is where doubt lives. Her days ended past midnight, and when the last call dropped, she would sit for a moment in the blue-black quiet of her office and feel something she had no name for, not loneliness exactly, but something adjacent to it. Something shaped like a room with no furniture. She had no children. She had no close friends, not in the way she understood the word, people who knew her fears, who had seen her cry, who called for no reason. She had colleagues, contacts, acquaintances bound to her by mutual professional interest. She had Lauren, who was brilliant and loyal, and kept Emily's life running with the precision of a Swiss movement, and who occasionally looked at her with an expression of quiet concern that Emily chose not to examine. She had a therapist she had stopped calling 6 months ago. She had success. She had the kind of success that fills a room before you enter it, that changes the temperature of conversations, that makes strangers straighten their posture when they learn your name. And she had learned she was still learning. Perhaps that success of this particular kind is a brilliant and terrible substitute for everything else. It fills the hours. It fills the calendar. It does not fill the apartment at 2 in the morning. On the night the story truly begins, Emily was in New York, finishing the last hours of what had been a 43-hour stretch of near-continuous work. She had flown in from Los Angeles on Monday morning for a contract negotiation with a European software firm whose terms had been, politely speaking, aggressive, and the negotiations had gone 3 rounds longer than projected, and by Thursday evening, when the papers were finally signed and the hands were finally shaken, she was standing in the elevator of a Midtown hotel, with her heels in one hand and her briefcase in the other, staring at her own reflection in the polished metal doors, and feeling something very close to nothing. Lauren had texted 3 times suggesting she take a later flight, sleep in the hotel, rest. Emily had texted back, "I'll sleep on the plane." She had meant it as a joke. She did not feel like joking by the time she reached the airport. The terminal was quieter than usual at that hour, the late-night travelers moving with the particular low-energy shuffle of people who have been awake too long and are not yet where they need to be. Emily moved through it quickly, the way she moved through everything, head down, purpose forward, no eye contact that might invite conversation. She bought a bottle of water she did not drink. She sat in the gate area for 11 minutes and answered 6 emails. She boarded early, settled into her seat in the business class cabin window, as always, the world arranged behind glass, where she could observe it without having to participate in it, and opened her laptop before the boarding door had even closed. She noticed the man in the seat beside her the way you notice weather, peripherally, with mild displeasure, and then quickly dismissed. He was wearing a dark gray wool sweater that had seen better decades. Plain dark pants. Low-profile leather sneakers that were clean but not new. He carried a backpack that was clearly functional rather than fashionable. The kind designed for durability rather than impression. He was perhaps a few years older than Emily, late 30s, she estimated, with dark hair going slightly gray at the temples, and the kind of face that looked like it had spent significant time outdoors, and was completely unbothered by this. He settled into his seat with the easy comfort of someone who is accustomed to small spaces and does not require luxury to feel at peace. On top of his backpack, tucked carefully against the overhead bag, as though it were something important, was a small pink stuffed bear with a ribbon around its neck. Emily looked at the bear. She looked at the man. She returned to her laptop. He was quiet. That was the first thing she noticed. Actually, not what she had initially clocked with her surface-level assessment, but the deeper register of his presence. He was very, very quiet. No fidgeting. No unnecessary movements. He settled in, arranged his things with calm efficiency, and opened a paperback book, actual paper, actual ink, and read. No headphones blasting, no aggressive armrest occupation. He accepted the menu from the flight attendant with a brief, genuine smile and a quiet thank you that was more warmly delivered than most people manage in their best moments. When the phone rang, he had been reading for perhaps 15 minutes. He glanced at the screen, and something in his face shifted. Not dramatically, just a small softening, the way a locked room looks when someone turns on a lamp inside it. He answered. "Hey, Bug," he said. His voice was low, modulated, conscious of the people around him. "Yeah, I'm on the plane." "No, not yet. We haven't taken off." A pause. Then, softer. I know. It feels long." Another pause. And this one stretched. And Emily found herself against every better instinct listening. "I'll be home when you wake up. I promise." "Did you brush your teeth?" she heard, very faintly, the sound of a child protesting this question with the particular theatrical indignation that only children under the age of 10 can summon. Daniel, she did not know his name yet, but she would. "This is the way the story goes," laughed. It was a quiet laugh, contained, but genuine in a way that reminded Emily of something she couldn't quite place. He murmured something else, gentle, rhythmic, and she heard the small voice on the other end grow quieter, and then he said goodnight twice, slowly, as though he were letting the word land properly. He sat for a moment after hanging up, his phone face down on his knee, his thumb resting lightly on its back. Then he picked up his book again and found his page without any drama at all. When the flight attendant came by to offer wine and cocktails, he shook his head politely. "Just water, please. Early morning tomorrow." Later, Emily didn't intend to observe this, either, but she was good at observing things. It was perhaps her most consistent talent. She watched him stand quietly when the older woman 3 rows back struggled with the overhead bin, her arms not quite long enough, her bag not quite light enough, and he was there before the flight attendant reached her, and he lifted it with one smooth motion and said, "Got it," and sat back down without making it a moment, without accepting the gratitude with anything more than a brief nod. Just, got it. Just, of course, just, this is what you do. Emily watched all of this the way she watched balance sheets carefully, systematically, drawing conclusions. And the conclusion she drew was one that unsettled her more than she wanted to admit. This was someone who was good without an audience. She returned to her laptop. There was a presentation to review for Friday. There were 3 contracts requiring her markup. There was a message from the board that she had been composing a response to for 40 minutes without writing a single word. The plane lifted off and the city fell away below them. All those lit windows going dark one by one as they climbed through the clouds, and Emily kept her eyes on the screen and her fingers on the keys and told herself she was not tired. She was exhausted. She had been exhausted for 2 years without stopping long enough to notice it. Somewhere over Pennsylvania, the turbulence came not severe, just the low-grade shuddering of a plane, finding its way through unsettled air, the kind that makes overhead bins rattle and causes the flight attendants to pause their rounds and grip the nearest headrest with the practiced calm of people who have felt this 1,000 times before and know it means nothing. Emily's hand tensed on the edge of her laptop. She did not like turbulence. Not because she was afraid of flying, she flew 140 times a year. She had no space left for that fear, but because turbulence reminded her, every time, that she was in a metal tube at 37,000 feet, and there were forces at work that she could not control, and control was the thing. The central organizing principle, the load-bearing wall of everything she had built. Her eyes grew heavy. She hadn't meant for them to. She had work to do, she told herself. She had always had work to do, but the cabin lights had been dimmed, and the hum of the engines was low and continuous, and the exhaustion, 43 hours of it, accumulated over months of not quite enough sleep, rose up through her chest and behind her eyes, with a quiet authority that no amount of professional resolve could override. Her head dropped once, recovered. Dropped again. She reached up to push her hair back, and the gesture was slower than it should have been. And then the turbulence shuddered gently through the frame of the plane, and her shoulder found the solid warmth beside her, and her mind stopped negotiating and let go. She was asleep within 30 seconds. Daniel felt it happen, the slight shift of weight against his shoulder, the change in her breathing from the controlled rhythm of someone working hard at staying awake to the deep, involuntary settle of genuine sleep. He went very still. He had been mid-sentence in his book, and he did not finish the sentence. He set the book carefully on his tray table and turned his head just slightly to look at her. She was even now, even in the specific vulnerability of sleep, composed. Her hands were still near her keyboard. Her posture had not fully released, as though some governing part of her was still on duty even in unconsciousness. But her face, in sleep, was different. The expression she wore while awake, focused, guarded, precisely calibrated, had dissolved. And what remained was just a face. Just a woman's face. The circles under her eyes were deep and violet-toned, the kind of shadow that takes weeks of bad sleep to build. There was a small crease along her left cheek, from where she'd had her chin in her hand. She looked, he thought, like someone who had been running for a very long time and had finally, accidentally, been allowed to stop. He had a daughter. He knew what it looked like when someone was running on nothing, and didn't know it yet. He did not wake her. He understood with the immediate certainty of someone who has lived close to exhaustion, who has sat in hospital waiting rooms at 3 in the morning, and eaten cereal for dinner 4 nights running, because he had run out of everything else that the kindest thing, the only real thing, was to let her stay. He adjusted his position as carefully as he could, shifting his weight slightly to the left to reduce the angle of her lean, giving her something steadier to rest against, and then he did not move again. The flight attendant came by 40 minutes in, noticed Emily asleep on the man's shoulder, and began to lean forward with the professional intention of waking her. Daniel caught her eye before she spoke. He shook his head, very slightly, and kept his voice barely above a whisper when he said, "Please don't wake her. She seems like she really needs this." The flight attendant looked at him for a moment, then at Emily, and then gave the small nod of someone who has, over years of this work, developed a good sense of when a moment calls for restraint, and moved on. He sat with her for nearly 2 hours. His arm went from uncomfortable to numb, to something past numbness. A deep ache that he breathed through the way you breathe through cold water steadily, without complaint. He didn't read. He looked at the dark window, and the stars barely visible through the thin cloud cover, and thought about Sophie, who would be asleep now in her room with the glow-in-the-dark stars he'd stuck to her ceiling 2 summers ago, and whether she'd remembered to put her retainer in, and whether he should finally repaint the kitchen, or whether she'd want to pick the color herself. He thought about the project he was heading to Los Angeles to consult on, the architecture of the thing, where the gaps were. He thought briefly, peripherally, about the woman asleep on his shoulder, and the precision of her exhaustion, and the particular loneliness of someone who is surrounded by importance and still feels far from home. He reached down, slowly, and unzipped the front pocket of his backpack, pulled out his light jacket, a thin, packable thing, good enough for the temperature change of a cabin, and managed, with the focused patience of someone long practiced at doing things one-handed while holding something precious in the other, to shake it loose and lay it across her lap and lower arms without waking her. She stirred once, just slightly, and then settled again. The jacket covered her to the elbows. He left his hand where it was. He did not move. When the captain announced initial descent and the cabin lights came up gradually, and the pressure changed in that particular way that makes sleeping passengers surface toward consciousness, Emily came back slowly. There was the moment of not knowing, where am I? What time is it? What is real? And then the awareness of warmth at her shoulder, and the slight disorientation of having been somewhere else entirely. She lifted her head and blinked and found herself looking at a man she had mostly ignored for the past 3 hours, who was looking very carefully out the window with the elaborate casualness of someone pretending not to notice that she has just woken up on his shoulder. She sat up straight. The jacket slid from her lap. She felt the heat in her face before she finished forming the words. I'm so sorry, she said, and her voice came out rougher than intended. Sleep-worn. I didn't mean to. I apologize. That was completely unprofessional. He turned to look at her then, and his expression was so uncomplicated, so entirely without calculation, that it stopped her mid-sentence. It's okay, he said simply. You looked like you were having a good week. A beat. A long one. She opened her mouth, closed it, looked down and saw the jacket on the seat between them. Saw the small water bottle he must have set there at some point already opened. Waiting, the cap placed neatly beside it, and felt something happen in her chest that she was not prepared for. It wasn't dramatic. It was the opposite of dramatic. It was the feeling of a very small door, opening in a house you had forgotten had rooms. Was that your? She gestured at the jacket. The cabin gets cold, he said, as though this explained everything. As though this were the beginning and end of the matter. She looked at him for a moment. Thank you, she said. And she meant it in a way that the word rarely got to be meant. You're welcome, he said, and looked back at the window, giving her the gift of not making a moment of it. The descent continued. The city appeared below them, spread out in its nighttime geometry. All those lights that from up here looked like a conversation between a million separate lives. Emily retrieved her laptop and found she had no desire to open it. She tucked it back into her bag and looked out the window instead, which was something she could not remember the last time she had done. Do you fly this route often? She asked. Not because she needed the information, because she wanted to hear his voice again, which was a thing she acknowledged only after she'd already said the words. A few times a year, he said. Work. What kind of work? Engineering, he said. Systems architecture, mostly. AI infrastructure. She nodded as though this were ordinary. It was not, professionally speaking, ordinary the number of people who could meaningfully describe themselves as working in AI infrastructure at this level could have fit in a not very large conference room, but something about the way he said it, completely unadorned, not deployed as information designed to impress, made it feel like he was telling her his height or the color of his car. Just a fact, just the shape of the thing. You live in Los Angeles? She asked. Pasadena, he said. My daughter is there. She's 7. He paused, then added, with that same unceremonious warmth. She's going to be furious with me if I don't stop for pancake ingredients on the way home from the airport. Emily heard herself almost laugh. It was a sound she barely recognized. That seems like an important priority. Non-negotiable, he agreed, and smiled at the window. And Emily looked at the side of his face, the gray at his temples, the line of his jaw, the way the smile settled into his expression like something that lived there naturally, and felt something she had no language for yet, something she would spend the next several weeks trying not to examine. They landed. They taxied. They collected their bags at the carousel, with the low-grade choreography of 2 people who have been traveling separately for years and are briefly occupying the same gravitational field. He had 1 rolling bag, efficient and worn. She had 2 matching ones, monogrammed, because she had been a different version of herself when she bought them and had not yet gotten around to replacing them. He lifted both of them off the belt before she could reach, set them beside her, and stepped back without ceremony. His phone chimed. He looked down at it, and his expression did the same thing it had done on the plane, that quiet interior lighting. He held the phone out briefly, just enough for her to see the screen. A voice message icon, and above it a contact photo of a small girl in a yellow raincoat making an enormous face at the camera. She's awake, he said, with the particular tone of someone who finds this simultaneously exhausting and wonderful. He played the message at low volume, and Emily caught, through the ambient noise of the baggage claim, a small, bright voice. "Daddy, don't forget the blueberries for the pancakes, not just the plain ones. Okay, the blueberries." She watched him smile at his phone with the unguarded tenderness of someone who has no audience and needs none. She thought, "I have been in rooms with some of the most powerful people in the world, and I have never seen anyone look at anything the way he is looking at that message." She thought, "What is that?" She thought, "I know what that is. I just forgot." They said goodbye in the way of people who sense they are at the edge of something but have no reasonable claim to more. She offered her hand. He shook it. Warm, brief, no performance. "It was nice sitting with you," he said, and she said yes, and she meant it as something much larger than the word. And then she walked toward the exit, and she did not look back, because she had trained herself very carefully never to look back, and because she did not trust what her face might do if she did. She thought about him in the car on the way home. She told herself this was because the experience had been unusual, and unusual things naturally occupy the mind. She thought about the jacket. She thought about 2 hours. She thought about a man sitting still for 2 hours with a numb arm so that a stranger could sleep. She thought, when did I last do anything simply because it was kind? She did not have a good answer. She opened her laptop in the back of the car and stared at the screen for 40 minutes and wrote nothing. 4 days later, Emily walked into the Nexara boardroom at 9 in the morning with the particular purposeful energy of someone who has not slept well since a red-eye flight and is unwilling to admit it. The agenda item was the one that had been keeping her board in a low-grade state of anxiety for 3 weeks. Project Meridian, the company's most ambitious AI integration initiative, had hit a wall. The architect they'd brought in had missed critical structural vulnerabilities. The timeline was compromised. The losses, if they didn't course-correct within 60 days, would be significant, measured in 8 figures, possibly more. "We found someone," said Marcus Webb, the board chair, sitting at the head of the table with the careful expression of a man about to deliver complicated news. "He's the right person. Possibly the only person who can fix this in time. He's consulted on 4 similar scale integrations in the last 2 years, all of them resolved on deadline. His patent portfolio alone covers 3 of the core vulnerabilities we're dealing with." He paused. "He's been difficult to secure. He doesn't take corporate work unless he's interested in the problem." "Who is it?" Emily asked. Marcus nodded to the associate by the door, who opened it. Daniel Brooks walked in carrying his backpack, the same one, worn, functional, completely at home in a boardroom, and stopped when he saw her. Something moved across his face, not confusion recognition, quick and complete, and then the particular expression of someone deciding, in real time, to respond to a surprise with composure rather than reaction. He set his bag down. He looked at her steadily. "Miss Carter," he said. And then, because he was exactly who he was, "It's good to see you again." The room had the temperature of a held breath. Emily, who had not risen to where she was by allowing anyone to see the interior of her face, kept her expression precisely neutral. Inside, something was happening that she did not yet have a category for. She thought of a jacket laid across her lap. She thought of a voice saying, "Please don't wake her." She thought of a pink stuffed bear and a man who turned down free wine because he had to be somewhere that mattered more. "Dr. Brooks," she said, because now she knew the board had sent her his file the evening before, and she had read it the way you read something you suspect is going to change things, with a careful thoroughness that is itself a form of preparation. Daniel Allen Brooks, 38. Doctorate in Machine Learning Systems from MIT, completed in 4 years, 17 patents. Consulting architect for infrastructure projects on 3 continents, published in 12 peer-reviewed journals, and widower, father of 1, currently listed as residing in Pasadena, California. She had read that word widower and felt it settle differently than the rest of the information. "Welcome," she said, and her voice was steady, which cost her something. They began to work. The days that followed were some of the most professionally disorienting of Emily's career. Not because the work was beyond her, it was challenging. Genuinely so, the kind of problem she hadn't encountered in years, but because of what it required of her. Sustained close collaboration with a person who refused, with complete consistency, to behave the way people in her world behaved. Daniel worked with a focused intensity during hours she specified, and was completely, cheerfully unreachable outside them. Not passive-aggressively. Not performatively. Simply, he had a daughter, he had a dinner time, he had a morning routine that began before she typically went to sleep, and these were not negotiable in the way that most things in her world were negotiable. He did not apologize for this. He did not perform guilt about it. He simply left at 5:15 with the same ease with which he had arrived at 8:30, and the work he produced was so precise, so complete, so architecturally sound, that there was nothing to say about it except that it was excellent. She found this, initially, baffling. Then irritating. Then something else. "I don't understand you," she said one afternoon, not quite meaning to say it aloud. They were alone in the project room. The city arranged behind glass 30 floors below them, the late afternoon light coming in at the specific angle that made everything look like a still from a film about a significant conversation. He was annotating something on the whiteboard. He stopped but didn't turn around. "What don't you understand? You're one of the best in your field. Probably the best for this specific problem set. And you leave at 5. He put the marker down and turned around, leaning back against the board. He looked at her for a moment with the calm, assessing attention that she had come to recognize as his version of thinking. "What would staying later accomplish?" he asked. "More work. Better work?" She opened her mouth and didn't have an answer. "Sophie is 7, he said. She's going to be 8. And then she's going to be 12. And then she's going to be 17. And she's not going to need me to have dinner with her anymore. And when that happens, I am going to have been there for every single dinner I possibly could." He said it not like a speech, not like a philosophy he was performing, just like a fact, stated plainly. The way you state the things you have lived through enough times to be certain of. If staying late tonight means I miss her Wednesday dinners for the next 4 months, I'd rather miss the deadline. "You don't mean that." "No," he agreed. "Not literally. But I mean the principle." Emily looked at him. She thought of her own father, who had stayed late every night and missed everything else. She thought of her mother, who had said, "Work is how he shows love," and Emily had believed this for years before she realized it was just a story adults tell children to explain an absence they don't know how to fix. "What happened to your wife?" she asked. And then immediately, "I'm sorry." You don't have to." "Ovarian cancer," he said simply, the simplicity of it the only way to say something that large. 4 years ago, Sophie was 3. He didn't look away. Margaret was extraordinary, the kind of person who made everything she touched more alive than it was before. A pause. "After she was gone, I thought for a long time about what she would want Sophie to remember about her childhood, and what I kept coming back to was, she would want her to have been there, to have had someone there." He picked the marker back up. "So I try to be there." Emily said nothing. There was nothing to say that would not be smaller than what he had just said. She left the office that evening at 6 o'clock. Not because she had to. Because she wanted to see what it felt like. She walked 10 blocks in the cooling air of an October evening, past restaurants where people were already sitting with wine and bread, and the unhurried ease of people who have decided to be present somewhere, and she stopped at a small place she had walked past 100 times without entering, and sat at the bar and ate dinner alone, and didn't open her laptop once. It felt enormous, and also very small, and she thought, this is how far I have gotten from ordinary life, that eating dinner is something to notice. She was falling in love with him. She knew this, the way you know a storm is coming, not from seeing it yet, but from the feeling in the air. The particular quality of the atmosphere, the way everything has begun to carry a different weight. She was not happy about it. She was, in fact, afraid of it with a depth that surprised her, because she had thought she had long since finished being afraid of emotional things. But fear has its own architecture, and this particular fear was very specifically shaped. It was shaped like the last time she had trusted someone with the interior of herself, and discovered that she had mistaken proximity for intimacy, and the discovery had cost her 3 years and a marriage, and the ability to cry at her own divorce. She avoided him for 3 days. She arranged for their meetings to include more people. She sent questions by email that she could have asked in the room. Daniel noticed, of course he noticed. She was beginning to understand that he noticed most things, simply without making a performance of it, and on the third afternoon, he appeared at the doorway of her office at 4:55, 5 minutes before he would have been leaving anyway, and looked at her with an expression that was neither wounded nor demanding. Just open and careful. Did I do something? He asked. No, she said. Too quickly. He looked at her for a moment with that quiet attention. Okay, he said. And then, you know, you don't have to be in full professional mode with me. Not every moment. I'm always in professional mode, she said. I know, he said. That's what I mean. She felt something crack somewhere behind her sternum. Not dramatically. Just a small fracture. In something she'd thought was solid. I don't know how to be any other way, she said. And it was the most honest thing she had said to another person in a very long time. He was quiet for a moment. You were asleep on a stranger's shoulder for 2 hours, he said, with a very small smile at the corner of his mouth. You know how, you just need to stop running long enough to let it happen. The article broke on a Tuesday, not a major publication, one of the tech gossip adjacents, but those stories have their own velocity. CEO of Nexara Technologies in rumored relationship with high-profile consultant. The headline was speculation. The photo was real. The two of them leaving the building after a late team dinner with a comfortable proximity that was, the article implied, suggestive. Emily had known, with the part of her mind that monitored these things, that something like this was possible. She had not made her peace with what it would mean. Marcus called her at 7 in the morning. The board was concerned. The perception of compromised professional judgment. The optics. She listened to all of it with the phone held to her ear and her eyes on the ceiling and felt, behind the careful executive blankness, something that was very close to anger, and another thing that was very close to grief. She called Daniel. She told him they needed to be more formal. More distance. She said it quickly. In the tone she used for difficult decisions, fast and flat, because to slow down was to risk the feelings catching up with the language. He was silent for a moment. Emily, he said. It was the first time he had used her name without the title, just her name. And the sound of it in his voice, steady, warm, unperformed, did something to her composure that she had not planned for. The board is not wrong, she said. Maybe not, he said. But that's not why you're doing this. She said nothing. You're not running from the board, he said quietly. You're running from this. Because you don't know what to do with it. She was quiet for a long time. I don't, she said, finally. I genuinely don't. I spent 4 years not feeling anything real, and now everything is. It's too much. I don't know how to. She stopped, started again. I don't know how to be loved without waiting for it to be taken away. The silence that followed was the kind that holds something rather than lacking something. You don't have to know how, he said. You just have to let it be there. She pressed her hand over her mouth. Something was happening to her face that she didn't entirely have control over. The last time she had cried, really cried, not the tight, painful non-crying of very bad days, but real tears, the kind that released something she couldn't remember when, long enough ago that the feeling was almost foreign. She felt it arriving now with a particular terror of something irreversible, something that once it starts cannot be called back. I don't know how to be loved, she said, and she meant it as the deepest, truest thing she knew about herself, and she was ashamed of it, and she said it anyway. You already are, he said. You just need to let yourself believe that it'll stay. She called him a week later. She drove to Pasadena on a Saturday morning with no plan, and no calendar notification, and no agenda, which was so outside her established patterns of behavior that she sat in the car outside his house for 4 minutes before getting out, simply acclimatizing to the fact of herself doing this. The house was a small craftsman, with a garden that was enthusiastically rather than precisely maintained roses, growing in slightly chaotic abundance, a bird bath, a wind chime that had clearly been selected by someone with very specific aesthetic preferences. And by this, she meant someone 7 years old. The garden made her feel something she could not name. It looked like a place that had been lived in with love. She knocked. There was a brief orchestral moment of interior noise, something falling, something being called, and then the door opened, and it was not Daniel but Sophie who stood there, all of 7 years old, dark-haired and serious, in a way that was deeply familiar, wearing a purple sweater with a cat on the front, and regarding Emily with the unembarrassed curiosity of a child who has not yet learned to disguise her assessment of new things. "Hi," Sophie said. "Hi," Emily said. "Are you Emily?" Sophie asked. "I am." Sophie nodded, as though confirming something she had already considered. "Daddy said you might come," she said. "He made extra pancakes." Emily felt her throat tighten. That was very thoughtful of him. Sophie stepped back to let her in. The house was warm. It smelled like coffee and something sweet from the kitchen. And the walls were covered in the accumulated evidence of a life being lived, framed photos, a child's drawings that had been framed with the same care as actual art, a bookshelf that sagged pleasantly in the middle, a basket of mismatched shoes by the door. It was nothing like her apartment. Her apartment was beautiful and deliberate, and perfectly maintained, and had the atmosphere of a place where someone sleeps but does not live. This house was alive. It made sounds. It held things. Daniel appeared from the kitchen in an apron, which was a thing Emily had not predicted, and which rearranged several things in her chest without warning. "You came," he said, and he said it without surprise, as though he had simply been waiting to see when. "I owe you an apology," she said. "You don't," he said. "I do," she said firmly. Because in this, she was certain. "I was unkind. Not intentionally, but I pulled away because I was afraid. And I let that become your problem when it was mine." He looked at her for a moment. "Accepted," he said. Simply. "Come, have pancakes." Sophie reappeared at his elbow, holding something, a piece of paper, folded once. She held it out to Emily with both hands, the formal presentation of a child offering a gift. Emily took it, unfolded it. It was a drawing in crayon. 3 figures standing in a line beneath a large circle that was unmistakably the sun, its rays extending in every direction like a child's idea of warmth made visible. The 3 figures were different sizes, tall, medium, small, and the smallest one was clearly Sophie, recognizable by the purple sweater even in crayon. The tall one, the tallest one, wore something that might have been a blazer. The middle one had dark hair. They were all holding hands. Emily looked at the drawing for a long time. "I made it last week," Sophie said, with the offhand gravity of a 7-year-old presenting work she has privately decided is good. "It's beautiful," Emily said, and her voice came out uneven in a way she could not fix. And she did not try to fix it. "Can I keep it?" Sophie considered this seriously. "Yes," she said, finally, "but you have to put it somewhere you can see it." "I will," Emily said. "I promise." She looked up and found Daniel watching her with an expression that she would think about many times over the years that followed, not possessive, not triumphant, not even particularly romantic in the conventional sense. Just, witness, just, I see you, just. "You are allowed to be this person too. He told me something on the plane," she said later, after Sophie had gone inside to watch something on her tablet, and they were sitting on the back steps with coffee, the garden making its small sounds around them. He said, "You said, please don't wake her." To the flight attendant. Daniel was quiet. "You said she seems like she really needs this." Emily turned her cup in her hands. "I've thought about that sentence more times than makes any sense." "You did need it," he said. "I did," she said. "I just didn't know anyone was allowed to notice." He looked at her. "Someone was always going to notice," he said. "You just needed to let them." She leaned her head back against the doorframe and looked at the sky through the gap between the rose bushes, that deep California blue, the color that people who grew up here learned to take for granted, and people who come from elsewhere never quite do. She felt something loosen in her chest. The specific tension of a person who has been holding themselves together alone for a very long time, beginning, tentatively, to set some of the weight down. "I'm not good at this," she said. "Whatever this is, neither was I," he said, after Margaret. "I was terrible at it. I didn't leave the house for 2 weeks. I burned dinner every night for a month. Sophie ate cereal for a month and a half. He was quiet for a moment. You learn by doing it badly for a while, and then gradually less badly. Emily thought of all the things she had done badly over the years, and told herself were excellence in disguise. She thought of a divorce she hadn't cried at. She thought of a therapist she'd stopped calling. She thought of an apartment with no furniture. "I'll probably be very bad at it," she said. "Probably," he agreed, comfortably. She laughed. It surprised her, the ease of it, the way it came up without effort, the way it felt like a thing her body already knew how to do and had simply been waiting for permission. She could not remember the last time she had laughed like that. Not a polite laugh, not a professional laugh, but an actual unedited one that showed her teeth and startled the birds in the rose bushes. Sophie appeared at the door with her tablet and evaluated the situation in the garden with the gravity of a field researcher, and then went back inside, satisfied. It was a year before Emily described herself as happy, in a way that felt true rather than performed. There were months of difficulty between that Saturday and the version of things that followed. The board required careful managing. The article required a careful response. She and Daniel had 3 arguments of the productive variety, and one of the type that requires an apology that takes 2 days to arrive, and is all the more genuine for the time it took. Sophie began calling her by name, with the easy confidence of a child who has decided someone is part of the furniture of her life, which is the highest category of acceptance available to a 7-year-old, and Emily received this with a fullness in her chest that she recognized, eventually, as joy. She changed how she worked. Not dramatically, she was still Emily Carter. She was still the Iron Woman of Silicon Valley. The company still grew, and the margins still improved, and the board found, to some of their surprise, that a CEO who occasionally left the office before 7 was not, in fact, a CEO who was losing her edge. She introduced a wellness policy that gave all employees 2 hours in the middle of the week that were genuinely unscheduled, no deliverables, no pressure, no KPIs, and the senior staff had stared at her in the first meeting, as though she had suggested something revolutionary, which perhaps she had. She began eating dinner at 6 o'clock most evenings. She called her therapist. She learned, slowly and imperfectly and with regular backsliding, how to let herself be seen. On a Saturday in late September, a year and some months after a red-eye flight that had not been, by any objective measure, particularly notable, Emily stood on the beach at Santa Monica with her shoes off and her feet in the sand, watching the sun do what it does over the Pacific, that long, dramatic descent. The way it makes the water go bronze, and then copper, and then the deepest orange, as though the whole ocean is deciding to become something different before the day ends. Daniel was beside her, his jacket over his arm, his shoes similarly abandoned somewhere behind them. Sophie had been awake since 6 in the morning, and energetic since 7, and had, over the course of the afternoon, catalogued every interesting shell, chased every viable wave, and made a detailed case for an ice cream that she had ultimately prevailed in obtaining, and was now, at somewhere past 4 o'clock, a warm and heavy weight against Emily's left side. Half awake, her sandaled feet dangling, her head tucked under Emily's chin. Emily became aware of it the way you become aware of something you have been hoping for without admitting the hope. The small weight of Sophie, settling more deeply, the rhythm of her breathing dropping to the slow cadence of sleep, the particular quality of trusting that a child's body takes on when it lets go. She felt it in her shoulder, in her neck, in her chest. She felt it the way she had felt something on a plane 1 year ago. The sense of being, quietly and without fanfare, chosen. She turned her head to find Daniel watching her. His expression was the same one from the afternoon, on the back steps. "Witness. I see you. Is this my punishment?" she said, softly, so as not to wake the child asleep on her shoulder. For all those years of very efficient flying, he smiled. Slow, warm, completely his. Something like that. She looked down at Sophie's dark hair. The small face tipped against her shoulder. The complete abandon of sleep. And felt something complete in a way that had no more useful word for it than that. Complete, like a room that had been empty for a long time, and now had light in it, and the sound of someone breathing. Daniel reached over. He picked up his jacket from his arm and laid it. With the careful ease of someone, for whom this gesture is now simply what he does. across her shoulders. Gently, unhurried. She looked at him. He looked back at her. Neither of them said anything for a while. The ocean came in and went out. The sun moved another degree toward the horizon. Sophie slept on. Some people walk into your life with great noise and announcement, with declarations and grand gestures, and the full performance of arrival. And then, there are the ones who come in quietly, who sit beside you in the dark without asking anything, who notice when you are exhausted and say nothing except this. Just this. Stay where you are. Rest. I have you. The ones who laid a jacket across your lap when you were asleep and never made it a story worth telling. The ones who changed everything without ever meaning to, simply by being, in the most ordinary possible way, the kind of person who is there. Emily Carter had built things of great size and considerable worth. She had made things that would last, but she had learned she was still learning, would perhaps spend the rest of her life learning that the things most worth building are not made from strategy or ambition, or the particular discipline of someone who is afraid of what will happen if she stops moving. They are made from the much harder and much quieter discipline of staying, of arriving each day not to achieve something but to be somewhere, of learning, slowly, imperfectly, with help from a 7-year-old who draws the sun with many rays, and a man who sat still for 2 hours in the dark, how to let yourself be loved. The jacket settled warm across her shoulders. She leaned into it, just slightly. The sea kept going,